how can putting all of this together and not forgetting the Trump tariff? In fact, that's a new, do I call it a spanner in the mix now? But that has just been dropped there in the mix. Putting all of this together, how can institutional reforms, engender the kind of inclusive growth that you've alluded to already? Now that we're building tall dreams and big dreams and talking about a $1 trillion economy, trillion naira economy, budget rather, and $1 trillion economy. How can institutional reforms engender the kind of inclusive growth, especially taking into cognizance some of these areas that I referenced and mentioned earlier?
Yeah, whatever you say, if you are going to achieve growth in an economy, you have to plan to increase the tempo of economic activities, because it is the economic activities that create the employment. You cannot have economic activity if there's no investment. So the first and foremost is investment coming in. Some of this investment appears to be borrowing. And there is a law around borrowing, which you call fiscal responsibility to 2007, that says you can borrow for long term, for capital expenditure or human resource development, and must carry out cost-benefit analysis and all of that. All of those requirements are not actually being met, but this is a way of borrowing for investment. But there are private sector investment that's more critical, and that's why I brought your idea down to 42 million MSMEs. What do you give to them as incentive? How do you encourage them to borrow money? How do you encourage them to invest? And where do you direct their investment? If it is one person, one job, you can get 42 million jobs. Now, there are MSMEs. You have to focus them to the productive capacity area that you want to develop. You mentioned agro-industrial. Yes, since you have farmers producing food, direct those 42 million to be able to act and add value to those so that you can deal with your import dependency and get it out of the way. And then, of course, that's where you are talking about inward, what do you call it, import substitution and import. So that is that. But of course, you can also corner it to other mineral resources like oil, gas. That's why I said Dangote has come in here, create an aggregate around him, and then focus on downstream and midstream investment. So you have petrochemicals, and there will be an explosion of companies. Over 5,000 companies that will work in that ecosystem and create the investment to about $100 billion. Now, you also move to human capital. Human capital is where you are talking about 3 million young people going to be trained in ICT that can now stay in Nigeria and be doing jobs abroad. Now, that is human capital that you are exploding. You are unleashing the cap of the human capital. India did this in 1960s. Where they committed to 250,000 engineers being produced and scientists and computer people from the 60s, India, and that resulted to surplus of manpower. In 1974, India has about 500,000 Indian teachers were teaching in Nigeria. But as soon as foreign exchange started drying up, they went back. China is training 3.5 million graduates in STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. This 3.5 million is more than the whole graduates in America, 2,600 American universities, all of them put together. And that's what China is spending just on STEM graduates. So if you don't invest in that area, then it will be a tragedy, because all these remittances you are getting, $20 billion, you won't be getting them.